the Watchtower Society and the Nazis. The August 22, 1995 issue of the Awake magazine presented a special article marking the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camps. Its title was prominently displayed, "The Holocaust, Who Spoke Out?" Following this direct question, the Watchtower Society of Jehovah's Witnesses would have the reader believe that there was, quote, "one voice in the midst of silence," on page 3. Following this outrageous statement that there was just one voice is the repeated claim that they, virtually alone, opposed the Nazi regime headed up by Adolf Hitler. However, they tripped themselves up repeatedly, never more so than when they made this interesting quote on page 4 from their September 26, 1945 Consolation magazine. And I quote, "Propagandists think the people have short memories. It is their intention to erase past history, presenting themselves in the modern disguise of benefactors, their incriminating record being covered up." This tape will prove that the Watchtower leaders are guilty of everything they have charged others with in the statement just made. First off, cult researchers like to have long memories, not short ones. What we can't recall personally, we can research in the archives of the Watchtower's abundant publications. Now let's talk about erasing past history. The most recent so-called history book that the Society published, called Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, has this favorable report on the time period that we're talking about. And on page 693 we find this quote, "By the summer of 1933, their work had been banned in the majority of German states. Therefore, on June 25th, 1933, a declaration regarding their ministry and its objectives was adopted by Jehovah's Witnesses at an assembly in Berlin. Copies were sent to all the high government officials, and millions more were distributed to the public. Nevertheless, in July 1933, the courts refused to grant a hearing for relief. Early the following year, a personal letter regarding the situation was written by J.F. Rutherford to Adolf Hitler and delivered to him by special messenger." End of quote. Did you happen to notice what is missing from this superficial account of history? Well, the contents of the declaration and the personal letter to Hitler. Well, we sensed a cover-up and began a hunt for the truth. The Proclaimer's book has proven to be a whitewashed cover-up on many other subjects we have investigated. Since the Society has chosen to erase their past history, we want to present the facts now. Partial accounts have appeared down through the years, with the incriminating parts deleted, of course. Jehovah's Witnesses prefer to quote the resolutions made in the United States and not in Germany. For an example of this, you could see the Watchtower of January 1st, 1989 on page 21. And this neglected the German resolution. However, those of you with access to the 1934 yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses will find some fascinating reading on pages 130 through 143. We're going to now quote some of the more interesting statements made by the Watchtower. Let's begin. Quote, "In June, the president of the Society visited Germany to take some action to get the Society's property restored to our possession and to carry on the work further. A declaration of facts was prepared, and on the 25th day of June, 1933, more than 7,000 of Jehovah's Witnesses assembled at Berlin and unanimously adopted the resolution, millions of which were printed and distributed throughout Germany." What's our comment to this? Well, we couldn't help but be amazed again at the priorities of the Watchtower Society. The president shows up when the property of the society was being confiscated, not before. You know, people always come second, and the big bucks come first in the world of the cults. The 1934 yearbook then goes on to print the resolution. After some paragraphs, the Watchtower Society proceeds to attack the Jews, the British, and the Americans in order to ingratiate themselves with Hitler. And I quote, "The greatest and most oppressive empire on earth is the Anglo-American Empire. By that is meant the British Empire, of which the United States of America forms a part. It has been the commercial Jews of the British American Empire that have built up and carried on big business as a means of exploiting and oppressing the peoples of many nations. This fact particularly applies to the cities of London and New York, the stronghold of big business. This fact is so manifest in America that there is a proverb concerning the city of New York which says, 'The Jews own it, the Irish Catholics rule it, and the Americans pay the bills.'" End of quote. Of that part, and continuing on a bit later, it says, "The present government of Germany has declared emphatically against big business oppressors and in opposition to the wrongful religious influence in the political affairs of the nation. Such is exactly our position. The Holy Scriptures plainly declare that these oppressive instruments proceed from the devil. It is therefore impossible for our literature or our work to in any wise be a danger or a menace to the peace and safety of the state." End of quote. Our comments on this? Well, this intolerant, bigoted statement could only have come from the arrogant Watchtower Society. Of course, they must badmouth the natural Jews, since they have declared that God is finished with the natural Jews, and they are now the spiritual Jews. This statement of support for Hitler and the German state and against the Jews, British, and the Americans speaks for itself. It is part of Watchtower history that cannot be erased and covered over. The Watchtower Society then goes on to proclaim that they actually share ideals with Hitler's German state. Continuing on in the 1934 yearbook on pages 137 and 138, we read, and I quote, "A careful examination of our books and literature will disclose the fact that the very high ideals held and promulgated by the present national government are set forth in and endorsed and strongly emphasized in our publications, and show that Jehovah God will see to it that these high ideals in due time will be attained by all persons. We are the strongest supporters of such high ideals. Now, because it appears that Germany may soon be free from oppression, and that the people may be lifted up, Satan, the great enemy, puts forth his endeavors to destroy that benevolent work in this land." End of quote. Our comment is, can you beat this one? Rutherford goes so far as to claim the ideals of Hitler and those of the society are one and the same. No matter how many statements the Watchtower makes as to its neutrality to governments and politics, the record is clear. The Watchtower Society, at least once in its history, endorsed at least one political regime, Hitler's. And lest there be any misunderstanding of the Watchtower's sympathy for Hitler's regime, the resolution continues on page 141, and I quote, "The people of Germany have suffered great misery since 1914 and have been the victims of much injustice practiced upon them by others." End of quote. On page 143, they continue along, quote, "Let all who love God work together to the honor and vindication of His name." End of quote. So, what can we say about this? Well, we think it's criminal that Jehovah's Witnesses now claim that they were the only voice raised against Hitler and dare to put that fact in print. Only the arrogant dare to put such big lies in print. In their publication, True Peace and Security, How Can You Find It?, published in 1986 by them, they show a clergyman shaking Hitler's hand and others doing the Heil Hitler salute. This is found on pages 24 and 25. And the Watchtower comment is, quote, "Yes, this world's religions will bear a heavy blood guilt in relation to all the slaughter of world history. For this they will be called to account." End of quote. Our comment to them is, if the shoe fits, wear it. But by the time the 1974 yearbook had been written, so had Watchtower history concerning the resolution. The resolution was described as follows on page 110 of the 1974 yearbook, and I quote, "It was a protest against the meddling of the Hitler government into the preaching work we are doing. Many in attendance were disappointed in the declaration, since in many points it failed to be as strong as the brothers had hoped." End of quote. What's our comment to this? Their description of the resolution is most misleading, and one can well understand the disappointment of the German brethren with Rutherford jumping into bed with Hitler, claiming the same ideals. But with typical Watchtower arrogance, the 1974 yearbook proceeds to blame a local brother for not translating Rutherford's original text strongly enough. When the leadership errs, the lowly sheep are always blamed. It was ever so. The only admission made was that the president of the society was, quote, "exceedingly friendly to Germany," end of quote. So much so that Rutherford, quote, "refused to let 2 magazines be used in war propaganda against Germany," end of quote. In other words, Rutherford chose jail in the United States of America rather than cross Germany in any way. Of course, this view of matters was withheld from the Americans, even the American Jehovah's Witnesses, and Rutherford was presented as a model of neutrality, even applying Bible prophecy to his prison time. Now we're going to move on and consider Rutherford's letter to Hitler. This letter gets very little mention in Watchtower publications, so one immediately looks for a cover-up. And here is a partial listing of interesting statements taken from that very letter. And I quote, "The Brooklyn headquarters of the Watchtower Society is pro-German in an exemplary way and has been so for many years. For that reason, in 1918, the president of the society and 7 members of the board of directors were sentenced to 80 years in prison because the president refused to use 2 of the magazines published in America under his direction for war propaganda against Germany. These 2 magazines were the only magazines in America which refused to engage in anti-German propaganda." End of that quote, beginning of another. That the Bible researchers of Germany are fighting for the very same high ethical goals and ideals which also the national government of the German Reich proclaimed respecting the relationship of humans to God. End of that quote, beginning of another. The contents of the books which were criticized only refers to the situation and actions within the Anglo-American world power, especially England, which is responsible for the League of Nations and its contracts and burdens imposed upon Germany. What is written in our literature, no matter whether from a financial or political point of view, is only directed towards the suppressors of the German people and their country, but by no means refers to Germany itself, which is trying hard to fight against the imposed burdens. End of quote. The Watchtower letter goes one step further and quotes paragraph 24 of the program of the National Socialistic German Party of Workers, the infamous brown shirts, and this portion from their letter reads, quote, "We demand the freedom of all religious denominations within the state as far as they do not endanger the state itself or violate the moral values of the German race. The party as such represents the viewpoint of positive Christianity without being attached to any particular denomination. It fights against the Jewish materialistic spirit inside and outside of us and is convinced that any recovery of the German people can only take place from the inside out." End of quote. The letter goes on to appeal to this statement, claiming the Watchtower activities fall within the government guidelines produced by Germany. The letter has the familiar generic signature at the end, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, Magdeburg. This letter does not sound like a later recalling of that time period by the Awake magazine of August 22, 1995, which glosses over the matter by saying, and I quote, "These Bible-based beliefs determine the steadfast stand of Jehovah's Witnesses against the Nazi ungodly demands. Thus they courageously spoke out and exposed Nazism as the evil that it was." End of quote. But the facts set the matter straight. When all appealing and supporting of the German Reich by the Watchtower failed to safeguard their property, then and only then did Rutherford begin to make angry and reckless statements against Hitler, even calling him the devil's representative. In fact, it appears that his unleashed anger and outrageous statements against Hitler, coming so soon after his supportive ones, put his brethren in grave danger. Jehovah's Witnesses were rounded up and put in concentration camps and did suffer terribly. Many of them were brave and courageous and of great faith in the camps. And we salute these long-suffering victims who paid the price for Rutherford's foolish mistakes. So, the Holocaust, who spoke out? Jehovah's Witnesses were but one small voice among many, but they spoke out of both sides of their mouth with forked tongue, both for and against the German Reich. They engaged in verbal Jew-bashing and helped to fan the flames of hatred against the Jews, and their voices, along with other bigots, resulted in the concentration camps. Under their leader Rutherford, they sought to placate and support Hitler and Germany. When Rutherford's methods failed, his unfortunate followers found themselves in the very camps with the very Jews they had denounced. The Watchtower publication, Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose, page 130, had this quote from The German Way, dated May 29, 1938. Quote, "Hitler said, 'These so-called earnest Bible students are troublemakers. They disturb the harmonious life among the Germans. I consider them quacks. I do not tolerate that German Catholics be besmirched in such a manner by this American Judge Rutherford." End of quote. Yes, Judge Rutherford must bear the brunt of the blame for how events turned out, and also for the innocent shed blood of his victims. And I would say that no doubt he knows this already in the hellfire that he denied.
Please look at your screen to see documentation on this topic.